In this video, we're going to be going over Chapter 10, looking at team dynamics, differences between teams and groups, creativity, decision-making, and problem-solving. Then we'll go over the various dynamics, the stages of team development, identifying and handling some of the problem team members that we might have in meetings, look at the steps of decision-making, and think about the techniques for creating some creative alternatives. Now, teamwork is basically folks getting together to get something done that they couldn't have done on their own. Now, there's a lot of organizations that are moving more towards teams, and we're going to look, there's a difference between groups and teams. And those teamwork skills where you can actually work together with someone is a huge part of our interpersonal skills. We tend to behave differently in teams than we do as individuals. There's some dynamics and things that come into play. And one of the things that happens is you get a bunch of folks together to problem solve, they're going to come up with a better solution than just an individual person would. Now, there is a difference between groups and teams. As it says here, a team is a group of individuals with a common purpose whose work is interdependent and requires collaboration, and who share mutual accountability for the results. Some key points here: common purpose. They're working towards one thing. They're interdependent. In other words, they have to work together in order to get something done, which requires collaboration. And they hold each other accountable. And a real difference between a group and a team. With a team, if one person fails, everyone fails. With a group, if one person fails, oh, that's too bad. Oh, George failed. Don't you feel sorry for him? It doesn't affect the other folks. So there is a difference between teams and groups, and that team aspect is where everybody has to work together and they really are all in it for one thing. Now, there's different types, okay? You have functional and you have task teams. In other words, functional teams may be folks who are part of a department and they're working on a particular project together. Task teams might be a task force or something for a specific purpose, a specific project of some sort. Committees. Many times you have committees that are working on something, and they're all focused on trying to accomplish some kind of thing on a continuous basis. So, for example, you could have creative committees. You could have scientific committees that are working together. Then you have the informal groups. In other words, folks get together just because they like each other. You also have virtual teams, and that's really a challenge today. There are so many organizations that are split up all over the United States and globally, and they're working together as a virtual team. I have been exposed to and been a part of teams that had a component in the United States, one in France, and one in Germany. I've worked with large oil companies where they had teams that were in the United States, Saudi Arabia, Europe, all over the place. And they were having to meet virtually, a lot of video conferencing and things like this. When you think about the teamwork aspect and how they perform, think about the team performance model formula. In other words, you have your performance, which is based on the structure, the dynamics, and the stage of development. And what happens is you pull all those together, you get more of a systems effect where the entire thing is only as strong as the weakest link. When you start talking about team structure, there's 4 key things to think about. You have leadership, the composition, problem-solving decision-making process, and then how they handle conflict. The leadership really does impact how well the team performs. Do you have an effective leader? Do you have somebody who is really working with other folks? Composition refers to, do you have the right people on the bus? Do you have the right people there to get some things done? Problem-solving and decision-making looks at the process and the approach that they take to try to solve problems. And then conflict is, how are they managing the conflict? Because you're always going to have some sort of conflict in an organization. How are they managing that? You have team dynamics. Now, dynamics is basically those patterns of interactions. In other words, you can step back and look and see what's actually happening within that team. Who's talking to whom? How are they approaching the problem? How are they handling some of the conflict? These are all things that go into the dynamics and what happens with that team. And when you start talking about dynamics, there's 6 components that impact it. You have objectives, size of the team, the norms that are set, the cohesiveness between the members, status of the members, and then also what kind of roles are they playing within the team. Objectives are what is it that's actually being set up as far as what the team is to accomplish. Do they have clear objectives? Size. It says here 5 to 9 members recommended. The best size team, true team, is 5 or 7 people. 5 or 7. Now the reason why I say 5 or 7, first of all, it's large enough so that you can get diversity as far as ideas. Second, it's small enough where people can participate. Nobody gets lost. And it's an odd number in case they vote, because that way you don't have ties. Always stay away from teams of 3, because then it's always 2 against 1. And you can't have 500 people on a team. There's just no way. That's not a team, that's a gaggle. So the best size is 5 or 7 people. Norms are the expectations that people set. It's kind of the unwritten rules as far as how the team is going to actually work. How are they going to treat each other? What are the things they're going to do? What are the behaviors? In other words, there may be a norm as far as how they dress. There may be a norm as far as you never show up late to a team meeting or something along those lines. Cohesiveness is how well they get along. How alike are they and how well do they get along? And one of the things that leaders need to do is work on that cohesiveness so that team members get to know each other. They get to like each other where they can. Now, we're not always going to be best buddies. The thing is, a level of respect and a level of comfort with each other can improve the cohesiveness. Status is member ranking within the group and the status of the group within the organization. A higher status gives them more power. Lower status, you get less. And then what are the roles that are being taken on by team members? There's basically 2 types of roles: task roles and maintenance roles. Task roles are the things that get things done. Okay, so for example, initiating the problem, consensus testing, information seeking, information giving. These are all roles that people will take on to make sure that things get done. Maintenance roles are the roles that somebody might take on to maintain the team itself and the relationships. So for example, encouraging others to be a part of things. Gatekeeping. In other words, if you have somebody who is kind of quiet, you're opening the gate and inviting them in, trying to get them involved. Or you have that person who comes down with a terminal case of verbal diarrhea and they never stop talking. Closing the gate so that others can participate. Compromising is another maintenance role. Listening is another maintenance role. So what are you doing as far as taking on these various roles within the team to make sure that, first of all, things get done and relationships are maintained? Teams go through various stages of growth. A gentleman by the name of Bruce Tuckman came up with this, and it's real easy to remember. Forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning. Teams tend to go through these stages of development. When you're first getting together, you're trying to figure out, what are we trying to do? How am I going to be liked? Will I have any kind of impact in the team? In the forming stage, everybody tends to be focused on just themselves. And you have to start working through some of that in order to pull the team together and make it a true team. Storming is that next stage. There may be differences as far as what is it that's supposed to be done, How are we supposed to work together? Who's going to provide leadership? That sort of thing. Norming is where you're actually setting up the norms or those unwritten rules as far as how we're actually going to work. You finally figure out from that storming stage, you know what, we don't have to be best friends. Thing is, we can get things done. Performing is really cool. If you have a team that actually hits that performing stage, it's a really neat experience. People are finishing each other's sentences. The work is going, just slick as can be. Most teams never hit performing. Most teams in organizations tend to get stuck in storming or norming. Now, they still get things done, just not very efficiently or effectively. And then there's going to be times when that team is adjourning. In other words, the project is over or something like that. If it was a really good experience, people feel a sense of loss. If it was a bad experience, if they couldn't wait to get out off of there, it's going to be just a sense of relief. So these are the stages that teams actually go through. One of the things that leaders need to do, or team leaders need to do, is make sure that they're managing the team meetings effectively. Now, the first part in managing team meetings effectively is planning the meeting. Having a written plan. What are the objectives for that meeting? Who is it that's supposed to be there? What are they supposed to contribute? What is your agenda? How do you make sure you work through everything? And you hand that out. You make sure that people get the information ahead of time so they know how to prepare. In the conduct of the meeting, you want to make sure that you start on time. One of the worst things you can do, especially with a team, is allow things to start late. Because what happens is that becomes a norm. So one of the things you can do as far as setting a norm is you go ahead and you get started on time. If everybody's not there, too bad. They'll have to get caught up some other way. By setting that norm like that, what happens is it will actually become something where people do get there on time so they can get the team stuff done. At the end of the meeting, you want to make sure that you're summarizing everything and always end your meetings on time. Never let them go over. This is why it's so important to plan that meeting ahead of time so that you know for each of the agenda items how long it's going to take, and you make sure you get done on time. You start on time, you end on time. Make sure that everything is accomplished. If it does not get accomplished, you put that on an issues chart so that it can be addressed in the next meeting. You're going to have some difficult members as far as your team is concerned in your meetings. You might have the silent member, in other words, the person who doesn't say much. The talker, the person who never stops. Or the wanderer who keeps taking you off track. With the silent member, draw them out. That's that gatekeeping aspect. Ask them their opinion. Ask them what they think. The talker, what you do is you summarize what the person has said. Now you wait for them to take a breath, okay? Eventually they have to breathe. When they take a breath, you jump in there, you summarize what it is that they've said, and then you use your body language to turn someplace else and say, okay, what do you think? Taking it to someone else. The wanderer, again, what you do is you say, how does that relate to our objectives for the meeting? If they can't relate it, then what you do is you let the team go ahead and say, let's move on. If it is something that may be something that the team needs to address, but not there, you put that on an issues chart to be addressed later. You might have the board member. In other words, somebody who just is checked out. One of the things you want to do is you want to make sure that you're inviting them in again. The arguer. In other words, they want to be the center of attention and they want to argue every little thing. Again, what you do is you take things back to the objectives of the meeting. And the social loafer, the one who wants everybody else to do the work and they don't want to do anything. That's one of those things where you step outside between the meetings and talk with them about what the expectations are. So whenever you're working with a team, never, ever, ever embarrass somebody within the team. It only makes them look like a martyr and you a bully. If there are some problems and things that need some kind of addressing, talk to the person outside of the meeting. Do not do that within the meeting. Now, problem solving and decision making. There really is a difference between the two. You have a problem to solve. There is something that needs to be accomplished. You have something that's in the way or something that's not working right. You need to get it fixed. Problem solving is figuring that out. Decision making is deciding between alternatives. Now, the decision making model, this is something that teams need and that everybody needs to get a handle on. Very first step, define the problem. My father taught me a problem well defined is a problem half solved. You need to make sure that you have clarity as far as what the real problem is. Where it says here, separate the symptoms from the cause. You go to the doctor. Doctor says, what's wrong? You start giving the doctor symptoms. The doctor then has to figure out what the cause or what the disease is. Once you get clarity on the problem itself, then what you do is you develop your criteria, your objective criteria. In other words, no matter what the final solution is, it has to meet these criteria. Now you can have like required and optional criteria. Required and optional. The thing is, you put that in front of the group. What criteria need to be met? And you get agreements on that first before you start thinking about any kind of opportunities or any kind of options. What are the criteria that need to be met no matter what? And you get consensus on that. Basically what you're doing there is you're deciding how to decide. And what it does is it makes it so that when people provide an idea, if it's something that's not going to work, they can let it go. Because they had already agreed to what the criteria would be for any decision. Once you understand what the problem is and you've set up your criteria, your objective criteria, then what you do is you start looking at alternatives. Just start brainstorming. Just start getting as many alternatives out there that you can. Then what you do is you analyze those alternatives by running the alternatives against the criteria. So first of all, you start saying, okay, this first option, does it meet this first criteria? Yes or no? If it doesn't, it drops out. If it does, you keep it there. Look at the next option. Does it meet these criteria, the required criteria? And you go through that. You're going to have some that are left over. Then what you do is you run them against the optional criteria. What this does is it gets as many possible alternatives out there, and then it helps to narrow down what's actually there as far as possibilities. Once you decide on one, plan, implement, and control. As Nike says, just do it. Now, creativity and innovation, there's a difference. Creativity is coming up with something that's brand new. Innovation is finding ways to use that stuff that's brand new. It's the application aspect. As far as the creative process, first of all, you have to get preparation going. Get familiar with the problem, what you're trying to do. Look for new stuff. Start bringing some possible solutions. Then what you want to do is take a break. Step back, sleep on it for a while, and incubate. Let it incubate for a while. I can't tell you how many times I've had something I was dealing with. I was trying to get creative on something. I put it aside for a day or two, then come back to it and I find the solution that I'm looking for. There's different techniques for group creativity. You have brainstorming, synectics, nominal grouping, consensus mapping, and the Delphi technique. Now, what are they? Brainstorming is just coming up with as many possibilities as you can. And there are rules. You want quantity. You want to get as many options, as many ideas out there as you can. No criticism. You cannot criticize or say that's a lousy idea sort of thing. Freewheeling is really wanted. In other words, really start thinking differently. Build on the ideas that have been presented. And then what you start doing is looking at all those. Then you can start deciding. This might be a good spot when you start looking at the decision-making model You set your criteria, and then what you do is you generate those alternatives. Brainstorming is a great way to get as many alternatives out there as possible. Once you get all the alternatives, you start analyzing them, running against the criteria. Synectics is another type of group creativity. What you're doing is you are trying to find different things that might be put together. So let's say you're talking about, okay, well, what if we could have submarines that had screen doors? Well, there may be a problem with that, but there could be an idea that comes from it. Nominal grouping, basically you are a group nominally. What that means is it's a way of getting together ideas and voting and narrowing down some of those. Basically what's happening is everybody on their own, you might be around a table and things like that. You write down as many ideas as you can. And then what you do is each person identifies an idea, throws it out there. Somebody captures that in one place. You get discussion and things going on, and then what you do is you start to have a vote. Okay, which one of these things might work best? And you may go through a couple of rounds where you say, okay, there's 30 items up here. What's your top 10? Or what's your top 3? And you just keep narrowing down. Consensus mapping is basically where you're trying to find a solution that is acceptable to everyone and that they will support when they leave. And the Delphi technique is basically done where people are not even in the same room. All right? What happens is you might ask for ideas, people send in the ideas. The ideas are consolidated, all of those ideas are sent out, people vote. There might be some more ideas that are put in. So somebody collects all of them, sends it back out, and that sort of thing. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages to groups making decisions. Now, first of all, you're going to get better decisions. And the reason is because you have different minds, different backgrounds, different wisdom that's going into making that decision. You have more choices that go into that, and people will feel better about what it is that they're doing if they have an input to it. Downside of group decision making is time consuming. You may have a couple of people who try to dominate the entire group. You may run into a situation of conformity based on groupthink. Groupthink is a concept that was developed by a guy by the name of Irving Janis. And the basis behind this is people want to be a part of a group. Consequently, and if it's a great group, all right, they want to be a part of it. If this is a great group, I really want to be a part of it. I don't want to lose this sort of thing. And they'll have a tendency to go along because they want to be a part of the group. They may think that something would be better as far as an idea, but they go along because they want to be a part of the group. And maybe a lack of responsibility, okay? Some people, you just don't pull their own weight. They have a tendency to let everybody else do it. So these are some of the key concepts from the chapter. If you have questions, just give me a call.